friends, I'm Chris McKenna from Protect Young Eyes. You can visit us anytime at protectyoungeyes.com or any of our social media spaces under the same name. And I'm here to talk to you about what can sometimes be an embarrassing or difficult topic for many parents and caregivers. And it's the issues of pornography, but also self-generated content. Now, when I say self-generated content, I'm talking about the nudes and the images and the videos that kids themselves are creating. Did you know that one of the most prevalent sort of forms of pornography that exists today, illegal pornography, is the content that is actually being made by children themselves? And we need to know how to not only prevent this, but also help our kids be prepared and us be prepared for when this insidious issue rolls into their lives. So there are three main questions that I want to present and then hopefully help you answer. Number one, I want us to understand the answer to the question, why is pornography uniquely difficult and uniquely harmful for young brains like those of our children? Number two, I want to answer the question, how can we prevent this issue, both of these issues, from being a part of their lives? And number three, I want to answer the question, what can we do to be prepared to respond when these issues become a part of our family or whatever, all right? So let's jump right in. A little bit about us at Protect Young Eyes. We want parents like you to be prepared and caregivers, but we know that you're often afraid of what kids will run into online. So we do research, education, and advocacy so that you can discover practical solutions. That's so important to us. And then you'll have a family that's prepared, balanced, and protected online. Those are the outcomes that we hope for in all of the topics that we cover at PYE, whether it's social media, compulsive gaming, whatever it is. We want you to be prepared, balanced, and protected online. Step by step, chat by chat, practical things that you'll know how to do these things. And that's so important to us, especially with the topic that we are talking about today. I want to start off with a small introduction, just going through a few statements that I often run into when I'm speaking with parents. And I hear parents say things like this. And to me, what this shows a bit of a misunderstanding or a lack of appreciation for what it's like to grow up in the digital age today. So I want to go through some phrases that I sometimes hear from adults when we're doing our presentations that show me that we do not understand some of the unique vulnerabilities, some of the unique situations that exist today in the digital age. I sometimes hear both people, normal, like adults in the audience, and also professionals say kids are resilient. Raise your hand. Have you ever heard somebody say that? I know that I have, right? We say it all the time. But if you've ever seen any show, like some criminal show that talks about somebody who's a serial killer as an adult, right? Someone that they're pursuing, they always discover when they're looking at the history or reading the file of the person, there's almost always one thing that all of those criminals have in common. That there was something that happened during childhood, some abuse, some neglect, and that caused them to be the way that they are as an adult. In other words, it's childhood, those formative years that shape us as an adult. Now, I'm not saying that every child who gets online is going to become a serial killer, not at all. I'm just saying we live in a time where all kinds of micro traumas are taking place in the lives of our kids. And I think we just think, oh, it's just TikTok or it's just YouTube. But these experiences, whether it's pornography or violence or content that they're just not ready to see, content ahead of schedule, it leaves little micro traumas in their lives, things that they don't quite know how to comprehend that then lead to other behaviors. And I think that early exposures to pornography are a trauma in the lives of our kids. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Next thing that I sometimes hear, especially from people in my generation, is, well, Chris, I saw my share of porn when I was growing up, right? We would go and look at a magazine or we'd watch something on Cinemax, whatever it was. Friends, if you think that two-dimensional version of a magazine, something that you went to periodically, or some sort of show that you watched on a VHS tape down at your friend's house, if you think those little bites of content that actually is quite tame compared to what is available today is the same as what kids have access to today on sometimes school-issued devices, you are wrong. It's not even in the same universe, right? That you could watch 100, maybe 1,000 different videos in a day of violent, horrific, illegal content if you want to today. You couldn't even get your hands on some of this stuff when we were growing up. Why? Because during my childhood and your childhood, there was physical distance, there was access, there were all kinds of physical barriers between you and that sort of video or other image-based content. It's just not true today. So to me, this is very analog thinking in a digital world. And those statements just prove to me that we lack an understanding sometimes of what it's like to grow up today, what it's like to deal with some of the pressures and some of the opportunities that are right in front of very curious, amazing brains all of the time. And we always have to remember that if those opportunities were in front of us, we would have probably taken advantage of them too, right? Where you snuck a peek inside of some, encyclopedia or some dictionary looking up something. Why? Because you were curious. And brains aren't any different. Young, developing adolescent brains aren't any different today than they were back in the 80s or the 90s or whenever you grew up. It's just that what we're putting in front of them, the opportunities that we're putting in front of them are so much more powerful and are so much more mature. And we're just expecting them over and over again to make good decisions. The test of us is what we do to protect our kids during this unique developmental time, this unique time neurologically, relationally, socially, spiritually, all these different unique periods of development that are going on in the lives of our kids. We have to do whatever we can to make sure that we protect them. So I first want to start with self-generated content, the content that kids share with each other. Now, this is not a free speech issue, right? Like it or not, pornography in the United States is First Amendment protected speech. But content that is shared of children to each other is not. Why? Because any explicit content of any minor, whether it's created by the minor or somebody else, shared by the minor or somebody else, stored by the minor or somebody else, is always illegal in the United States. So that's not even an issue here. And when you look at the different states, and I want to point to cyberbullying research here that you can find online, you can see that different states here in the US have all kinds of different laws in place right now. And this makes it difficult, right? Some states are way behind, that they have all kinds of old laws on the book that still talk about child pornography that was created and then distributed in physical format. But there's nothing on the books that deals with the digital way in which it can be shared right now. And now they're way behind because now we have deepfake AI technology that is it illegal? It's generated not actually a child, but the image of a child, right? So this is all just to say that our laws are way behind and they're not going to do a good enough job protecting our kids. So we have to do much of the work here. And some research by an amazing organization called Thorn shows how prevalent this is, right? 40% and 1 in 3, right? We're talking about significant numbers of our children are experiencing this. They're participating in the trading of nude photos. They are receiving unsolicited, sometimes nude photos, right? This happens all of the time. And so we just need to be aware. And friends, like it or not, this is an issue that you've got to talk about long before you think you need it, long before you want to, and long before your kids run into it. Why? Because I want to make sure they're ready long before it happens. Not the day before or not the day of, but long before, so that in that moment they've known for years because of your instruction what to do in a situation like this. And we have the horrible issue going on right now of sextortion more and more. When you talk to Internet Crimes Against Children's task forces, which are law enforcement, state law enforcement agencies all over the country that deal with these sorts of online harms, or the FBI, or NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they'll tell you the number one issue that they're dealing with today, particularly when it comes to our young men, is the issue of sextortion. And this is where somebody posing as somebody else, they'll approach a young man, often a young man, through a DM, a direct message in some sort of platform. It could be TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, right? They send a message and they try to entice them. And they're often looking for kids that are slightly more vulnerable, just in the types of posts that they're creating, whatever it might be. And they'll solicit them and say, hey, I'll do this if you do this. And they'll try to convince them to send some kind of compromising photo or video. And then when the child does that, the extortion begins, the pressure begins, the coercion begins. When then they try to get money, right? That's the extorting part, money out of them to convince this bad actor to not share this photo or video with anybody else. And they've often done their homework where they know where the child maybe lives. They know maybe a little bit about their family from other public information that's available. It could be even on parents' public social media platforms. And so the child starts to feel pressure and anxiety, and they sometimes will do horrible, horrible things. We've had cases all over the country, including here in Michigan, where I'm from, where young men have actually taken their lives, right? That they have died by suicide because the pressure was so great from this situation. They simply felt hopeless and they didn't know what to do. And friends, this isn't their fault, right? Trying to answer the question, why are our young people uniquely vulnerable to some of these sexually charged issues? And it's because of their amazing brain, right? When you look at the brain, especially the adolescent developing brain, there are three functional areas that I want us to be aware of: the reptilian part of our brain, the limbic system, and then the neocortex. In the reptilian part of our brain, this is the part of the brain that is active from the very beginning, right? All three parts of our brain are with us from the beginning, but they are more developed during different phases of our lives. Now, from the very beginning, the reptilian part of our brain is keeping us alive, asking a very important question of, am I safe, right? As a baby, you poop, you pee, you eat, that's about it. And it's just simply survival. It's keeping you alive. But then as an adolescent, as an adult, it's doing all the things regulatory, right? Hormonal things that you don't think about. It's keeping us safe. Number two, we have the limbic part of our brain, and this is the emotional connection center. It's asking questions about, where do I belong? Am I loved? Does somebody notice me? And this is the part of the brain that is on fire as a young person. So you can see why the issue of sextortion, which preys on that connection, which preys on that arousal, which preys on that emotional part of the brain of being noticed, of being loved, can be so easily weaponized in the life of a young person. During adolescence, the limbic system is on fire. It's what's being developed. It's why kids are looking for friends, why they're pulling away from adults in their lives and looking for connection with others. It's because of that unique neurological development that is going on. And that's good. It's a sign of their independence, and that's what we want. But you can see where technology can sometimes weaponize that. And then finally, we have the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, and this is what is always there, but it's not as plugged in to the other parts of our brain. So it's not governing our decisions as closely as it does when we're adults. This is why sometimes curious, impulsive teenagers do curious, impulsive things, because the thinking, logical part of their brain isn't fully plugged into that part of their brain. This is why they'll do things that we don't understand. They're not thinking about the outcome. They're only thinking about the emotional impact of it. And will I be popular? Will I be noticed? Will I be more loved? That's why they're different, right? So whether it's sextortion, whether it's sexting, whether it's pornography, you can see why our young people are uniquely vulnerable. Now on the screen here, you can see some of the things that we need to do in the midst of a sextortion issue. Ways that we need to respond, because our own emotions as parents can sometimes cause us to make bad decisions in the heat of that moment. And I want to make sure that you're ready. So at Protect Young Eyes, we've written all about this issue. I'm going to go right to the next slide, which shows you a QR code. You can pause the video here and you can scan that QR code, and that's going to take you to our blog post that talks all about how to respond. 10 things that you need to do if you discover that your son or daughter is in the middle of a sextortion scheme. So important. Please do those things, right? So this is an issue that is now being exacerbated because of deepfakes and nudifying technology. If you're not familiar with what this is AI, which can take any photo of anyone and make it do anything. So now we have deepfakes that are creating photos of bad actors and videos of bad actors. So they look like someone who's normal, that is very believable. They look like somebody who is kind or their age. Very, very believable. And now these are being used to even take sextortion to another level. And it's hard to tell the difference. You can find full video accounts of actors and celebrities that are all deep fake videos. None of it is real. So this is an issue that we also have to be aware of, and how it can even take the horrible issues of both pornography, because you can take images of children and turn them into pornography and then share them. Right now we have deep fake illegal content being shared of kids that are at prom and kids are at other places, that people are taking photos of them and turning them into horrible content and then sharing it. So again, we've written all about this issue of deep fakes. And if you scan this QR code, you'll go to 15 different steps. You can't fully prevent this issue, but there are 15 things that you can do in your home and with your family that can help you mitigate the risk of this issue just a little bit. And so I want you to be able to do those things. All right, friends, this is the world that they are growing up in, right? Radically different from what we grew up in, radically different than the risks that were present in our analog childhood. Now, could we find some of these things? Certainly we couldn't have found deepfakes. None of that technology even existed. But could we find pornography? Could we share a nude, actual physical photo of a child? Yes, but you can just see how radically different it is today, when all of this is digitized, when all of this is scaled in a way that is shared so easily, and how the amazing brains of our young people can be tempted to do things that pull them into situations that are almost impossible at times to undo. All right, now moving into the issue of pornography. This is one that you're probably, at least aware of. It's impossible to not be aware of it. But I think what we need to realize is that this is not the porn that we grew up with. This is not the issue that, again, the magazines and the physical two-dimensional nature of it. It's living in the digital spaces where we want our kids doing other things, right? We sometimes give our kids social media thinking it's just communication, right? It's just social media. But did you know that over 40% of kids consume content, pornographic content, through social media? And so it's in those same spaces. Did you know that over 10% of kids consume pornography on school-issued devices? That 58% of kids stumble into pornography when they're not even looking for it, that it's accidental. There's new research that has come out from Common Sense Media pointing to some of these situations that I just think we need to wake up as adults and realize that it is everywhere. Another study done by the Reward Foundation over in Europe found that 25% of unfiltered video content, right? If you look at the internet, the World Wide Web, right, as old people call it, unfiltered internet, if you just look at video content on the unfiltered internet, 25% of it is pornographic. So if we're not doing our job of monitoring and filtering, imagine in an analog scenario that every day that your child is connected to something that is connected to the internet. Imagine a magazine stack, that there are 4 magazines on a table in your living room every single day, and one of them is pornographic, and you just hope that your child never runs into it. That's what the unfiltered internet is like today. And the research just supports how prevalent it is, how many kids are running into it, how many kids while doing homework stumble into it. We ask kids that question all the time during our presentations. So our kids need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared to handle it, because when young brains see pornography, it activates a whole neurological sequence of events that the brain is actually designed to want. Right? Pornography activates neural pathways that are good, right, and productive, right, for keeping the species going, but it does it in a way that is weaponized. It does it in a way that is not productive, especially for young brains with the type of content that they are able to see. And again, answering that question, why are young brains uniquely vulnerable to this? And it's because when young brains see pornography, when they haven't been educated about it, it means they don't know where to put it. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know what file in their brain to put it in. And so it causes confusion, it causes chaos, It causes them to not be able to sleep at night. It causes them to feel anxious because they're not sure where to put that thought or where to put that image. And in the most horrible of cases, it causes them to harm other children. As we have spoken to children's assessment centers, which there's over 800 of them all over the country, these amazing organizations that help families deal with sexual abuse, whether they're the child who is the one that is abusing other children or their child is the victim of sexual abuse. In 100% of the cases, when I spoke to the interviewer here in Michigan, 100% of the young people who were the ones who were sexually abusing other young people, those who were abusing had been exposed to pornography as a child. I've also run into this in conferences that I've gone to, where I've gone to teacher conferences all over the country. And there was one that I went to in particular where I did a whole segment on what our kids are dealing with related to pornography. And I had a booth set up where they could come up and talk to me afterwards. And I had two different principals within 20 minutes of each other, both tell me the exact same horrible story. And they both happen to be fourth grade boys. Like in sequence, they come up and said, Chris, we just had to expel a fourth grade boy from school. Why? Because he was inappropriately touching his teacher. It wasn't just a one-time thing, it kept happening. And as they pressed in, asked more questions, they discovered that in both of these cases, these boys were consuming pornography at home. Because when young brains see pornography, young brains do pornography. They practice it. They can't help themselves. So you can read about these 5 issues, these 5 unique ways that pornography can impact and cause behaviors. Then when kids run into it, scan this QR code and you can read all about it. Now earlier I referred to early childhood exposures to pornography as trauma. There's a lot of research that's been done on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences are those that increase certain outcomes in the lives of our children, ultimately death in some cases in the worst. And when you look at some of what they're discovering now related to pornography, they're classifying those who deal with the issue of pornography. They're starting to classify pornography exposure as a child as an adverse childhood experience, something that causes unique trauma in the lives of kids. Again, causing them to be anxious, not knowing what to do with it, causing them to harm other children, ultimately making life choices, riskier life choices that increase the probability that there's going to be a bad outcome in their lives, right? And again, it lives in the places where sometimes we want them doing innocent things. We just have to be ready. Earlier, right, just a moment ago, I referred to the issue of peer-on-peer sexual abuse. This is one that I want us to be aware of, because sleepovers can be a spot. I'm not saying that we need to remove all sleepovers from the lives of our kids, but it's a spot where risk is present. Sleepovers are different today when it comes to technology. And I've had parents tell me about horrible things that have happened at sleepovers when there's unfiltered devices and they see things they're not ready for and they try things on each other. Again, these are issues that you can read about. If you scan this QR code, you can learn more. So now I want to talk about some solutions. I'm guessing that if you're watching this and other videos, that I don't need to convince you anymore that pornography, sextortion, sexting, that these are issues that aren't present, right? I don't need to convince you of them. I don't need to show you more ways as to why they're bad or what's going on, right? You know this. And I think we know these things. But now what I want to do is I want to point towards some solutions. So going back to the questions that I asked at the beginning, number 1, I asked the question, why are these issues uniquely vulnerable to our children? And I think we've answered that question, right? When you look at the neurology, we look at the brain, we look at these things, right? I think we've answered that question. Now I want to tackle the next 2 questions, which were, how do we prevent these issues from being in the lives of our kids? And then how do we prepare ourselves and our children for when, not just if, but when these things happen? There is almost 100% chance that pornography or sexting in some way is going to impact your children if you give them a smartphone, if you give them social media. Even if they have a school-issued device, the probability that they're going to run into something is just so high that we have to be ready. In the digital age, we cannot just pretend it isn't going to happen. There's no such thing as not my kid. You cannot stick your head in the sand. When it comes to these issues, every single parent, grandparent, caregiver has to be prepared for handling these difficult topics. And we want to show you how. Number one, I want to give you a bit of a parenting checklist. And these things are going to apply both to pornography and to sexting, right? Number one, we need to make these more normal topics. And how do you do that? You do that by talking about it casually, not big, long PowerPoint presentations. It doesn't need to be elaborate or elegant and pretty even. It just needs to be frequent and little drips in their lives. That's how you make these more normal conversations. And I'm not saying normal in a way that we diminish the significance of it, but normal in a way that we've removed the shame from it. Therefore, they feel comfortable talking to us. They feel comfortable coming to us whenever these issues are present, whether it's something in their own lives, something they see in their friends, right? We want it to be normal enough because we've talked about it enough that they will come to us. And so whether it's pornography or sexting, when's the right age to talk to our kids about these issues? It's a question I get all the time. So something that I'll do in the presentations that we do for parents, we do hundreds of live talks, right, all over the world, is in their note guide, I'll have them write down an age. I'll say, okay, what do you think is the right age to talk to your kids specifically about the issue of pornography? And I'll give them a moment and they'll write down an age. And then I'll say, all right, cross it off. And I want you to subtract 2. And that's probably the right number. And they're all like, oh my gosh, right? Because the risk, sometimes parents will figure out and they'll write down a really low number because then that's what I'm going for. But the risk is usually that we don't go too young. We wait as long as we can. And if you think waiting until when they need it is the right approach, you're wrong. Because pornography is a super normal stimulus, right? I showed that earlier, that it activates all kinds of neurological sequences and curiosities inside of kids. One little talk is not going to stop that train. We need to have frequent, persistent talks with them all the time. So something that we say at Protect Young Eyes is 10 before 10. We want 10 conversations about pornography before a child turns 10. Now, some of you, when you hear that, start to freak out a little bit. And I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to put a QR code up here because when I say 10 before 10, again, it doesn't need to be a PowerPoint. It doesn't need to be elaborate. It doesn't need to be elegant. It doesn't need to be an hour-long presentation. Little drips, little mentions, casually, naturally, in the course of their lives. And so in this post, 10 before 10, we explain some of the natural, curious, just everyday ways that you can talk to your children about these issues. And you can apply those same principles to all kinds of digital issues, not just the issue of pornography that we're talking about today. But same is true about sexting, right? Even if your kid doesn't have a smartphone, do they have an iPad? iPads are still in group text. They're still communicating, sometimes with friends. Can images be shared there? It's just like a big smartphone. That's all it is. It's just a bigger version of an iPhone, right? And so we need to prepare our kids for these issues and have multiple, frequent conversations years before we think that they need it, and giving them permission to put it down and tell someone. And walking through this sequence with them over and over and over again, so they know exactly what to do in these situations. Again, whether it's something they receive or something that they bump into. Because as I talk to kids, right, just in YouTube, I'll say this all the time, right? YouTube, even in restricted mode, friends, trust me when I tell you, YouTube has a whole different idea of what is appropriate for children than you do. And I'll talk to elementary school kids all the time, and I'll say, hey, how many of you love YouTube? And of course, all their hands go up because they all love and watch YouTube. And then I'll say, I don't want you to put your hands up now, but I'll ask them, how many of you, while watching good things on YouTube, sometimes have YouTube suggest things to you that you know you shouldn't watch? Just nod your head. And you slowly start to see all the heads in the room start to nod. Friends, you have to prepare them and let them know what to do in that situation. Tell them that it's not their fault, and then to put it down and to tell someone. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is super practical, but it may be the most difficult thing to do for us as parents. That delay is the way. This is the hashtag that we use at Protect Young Eyes. Now, it seems contrary to what I just said, which is to talk early and often. I'm not talking about delaying the talks. I'm talking about delaying the devices. There's no such thing as too late when it comes to a smartphone, when it comes to social media. In 8 years, I've never had a parent come to me and say, Chris, I screwed up. I gave my kids Snapchat too late. There's just no such thing. And so I want us to delay certain technologies as long as possible. Delay is the way, is a slow tech strategy. We've been saying this for years, and not a no tech strategy. Our kids can be savvy when it comes to technology, right? My sons, my middle school sons, they know how to code. They know how to use technology, right? They know how to type. They know what a username and password is. They know how to navigate the digital spaces that are appropriate to them, but it's all about right tech, right kid, right time. Your kid is not going to be behind if they don't have a smartphone, right? If you don't want them to have access to 100 million things and 100 million people, then don't put 100 million people in their pocket, right? It just is logical. In an analog way, if you don't want your kid to get hurt on a playground that has dangerous equipment and has pornography on posters that's all around it, you wouldn't take them to the playground. And I think that's what's going on when we put our kids inside of digital spaces that were not designed for them, that never thought about that kids could be using them. And we put them in there all of the time. So delay is the way. And we believe that especially junior high, we want to keep junior high as just clean of many digital spaces as possible. Trust me when I tell you, middle school doesn't need more chaos, more drama, right? More difficulty. And I just think that no middle school child is better or has a better chance of staying free of these things when we put them inside of these digital spaces. That the best things for our middle school children are almost always analog. For our elementary school, almost always analog. And I want us to preserve that as long as possible. Those are some of the relational things, some of the parenting things that we can do. And I want to get into some of the technical things that we can do, right? Both relational and technical solutions here. And this one sounds really weird. I want us to hug our router. Weird, right? It's a device. Why would I go and hug it? Well, a lot of you probably don't even ever think about your router. You're probably using it right now, maybe even to watch this content. You don't even think about it. Maybe you haven't even figured out where it is in the house. I don't know. You know somebody installed it and you know that it works and you just hope that it gets you online. But your router is actually the most important digital device in your house, especially when it comes to young children. Now, I know that older children sometimes have devices, many times have devices that have a SIM card. Therefore, they're connected to a network. We'll get to that in just a minute. But for our younger children, almost all of the devices that they use depend on Wi-Fi. Therefore, the router is the way that you control how they get to the internet. A Chromebook can't get to the internet without a router. Your smart TV can't get to the internet without a router. Their gaming systems, PlayStations, Xboxes, which by the way, all have access to the internet, can't get to that internet without a router. The Kindle or the tablet, the iPad, none of those can get to the internet without a router. I know, again, some iPads do have SIM cards and can use a network, but a large majority of the iPads that our kids are using do not. Therefore, they depend on the network in your home. Therefore, if you control the router, you control their online experience. So hug your router. It is the most underappreciated digital device in almost all of the homes of all the parents that we talk to. Nobody ever thinks about it, but it's the number one way to prevent early childhood exposure to pornography. It's the number one way to make sure the internet is not used at night. And so when it comes to the issues of sextortion, because what you can do is, I know sometimes you'll have your teens turn in their devices at night. Great. But did you know that all those old iPhones sitting around your house, old tablets, right? They all still work on Wi-Fi. And so maybe those old iPhones don't have a card anymore and you're not paying for them, but they're all just iPods waiting around to be used. And even when you take a device away, kids hand around devices to each other. Oops, why? Because they all have cards and they all have the because sometimes we have teens with devices, right? And we control their access at night. And so we take maybe their devices away at night. But do you know that kids, they hand around these devices like candy, right? They hand around old iPhones to each other when they're taken away from each other. And so even if you have old iPhones sitting around, which a lot of us do, that old iPhone 6, old iPhone 8, I know it doesn't work on cellular anymore, but you know what? It still works on your router. And so I want us to know that. And you can control that by having a router that controls what devices use it. That when a device tries to use it at night, it can't get in because you've limited it to what devices can actually use your home network. So friends, you can see where whether young or old, because the issue of sextortion almost always happens at night. It almost always happens in the middle of what we call the toxic trio, right? Bedrooms, boredom, and darkness. When those things are present, but the router can help prevent that nighttime access. And so what I want you to do is I really want you to scan this QR code, and you can read our ultimate guide to routers. And this can explain what decisions you need to make. Who knows what situation you might have, right? Maybe you have a modem and a router that are one device. What can you do? Maybe you have certain service providers. What do you do? It talks all about different options, the parental controls that sometimes exist that you didn't even know existed on routers. This is the post for you to figure out this sometimes really technical thing that really confuses a lot of parents. And also with devices, in order to prevent and to make sure that a right kid is on the right device at the right time, is we can use different devices that were actually made for kids. There are devices that were actually made with kids in mind, whether it's Bark or Gab or Trumi or Pinwheel or other. There's all kinds of devices that are out there that were actually made for kids. You can read about them on our website, but this is the type of thing that keeps kids in devices that were actually designed with them in mind. We do not want a child's first smart device to be an iPhone because it wasn't made for kids, and there's backdoors to browsers, and I have so many messages from parents who thought they had their iPhone locked down, but their kid found some backdoor to Google and now they're searching for things. It happens all of the time. So friends, use a device that was actually made for them. Now, earlier I referred to the fact that there are devices, right, that use cellular, right? When you give a kid a smartphone, it works on cellular, out and about. It doesn't depend on your router. That means you have to have software on the device that also controls what's happening when it's not connected to your home network. And there's many of them that are out there. I have just a couple on the screen here. You can read about all the different device level software that's available on our website at protectyoungeyes.com/devices, and you can read all about those. And that's where you can see, what do you do on a Chromebook? What do you do on an iPhone? What do you do on an Android tablet? What do you do on whatever, right? It could be your Apple Watch. It could be on your Kindle. All of these different devices, step by step, we explain some of the software you can put on them, whether they depend on Wi-Fi or not. You can go to our website and see step by step how to set them up. But it's important to have software that is on the devices, because even that Chromebook that depends on Wi-Fi while it's at your home, what happens when it goes to someone else's home? And maybe they don't have a router that is controlling what goes on. That means the device itself also has to have software on it that when it moves to other networks, it is also being controlled, right? So make pornography a normal, make sexting and sextortion normal conversations. Know that delay is the way. Delay certain addictive technologies as long as possible. Keep them out of their lives as long as possible. Don't put that thing that can cause the access in their pockets. Number 3, hug your router, right? Understand this. And then number 4, don't freak out. Be calm, be calm, be calm. Friends, the number one way to help your kids deal with this issue is for them to know that they can come to you about it. Now, you establish this relationship and this connection with the first one of making these normal conversations. But this is more after the fact. What happens after you discover something happens? What happens after you look in search history and you see something that your child is looking at? What happens when you know in your mama or your dad or your whatever gut that something just isn't quite right? Then what do? You stay calm, don't freak out, don't freak out, don't freak out. Because what I want us to remember, friends, is that most of the time when these things happen, it's not their fault. These are digital spaces that were not made for kids, and we drop them inside of adult technologies all of the time. And then we expect these young, amazing, developing, curious, impulsive brains to consistently and persistently make right choices. When at the end of the day, you would have done the exact same impulsive things. Again, 14, 16, 8-year-old brains, they're no different today than when you were growing up. It's just you had a lot fewer opportunities, a lot fewer temptations, a lot fewer doorways through which you could walk through that would irrevocably change your life. And that's what we've put in the pockets of our kids. So it's often not their fault. And I want us to remember that as we're dealing with these issues, because chances are at some point, if you give your child something connected to the internet, at some point they will make a mistake related to these issues that is going to break your heart. That is inevitable. The variable here is how you respond. Be calm, be calm, be calm. Right? Then the fifth one here is to crush shame. And how do we crush shame? It's by responding calmly. Because what happens when, after we've told our kids, you can come and tell me anything, and they come and tell us something and we freak out or we're disappointed, or even the look on our face lets them know that they've done something wrong. You're just going to cause them to never want to come back to you and talk to you about anything again. So we crush shame by understanding this issue, by watching this video, by reading and knowing why they are uniquely vulnerable to these problems. This here does answer a lot of that why. Going back to the first question again, it's more building on why they're uniquely vulnerable, why some kids can't stop looking at pornography, why their brains with the mirror neurons that are inside of them sometimes get stuck on that curious path of looking at pornography, right? This blog post here is actually going to answer a couple of the questions, not only why, but then it's going to help us respond with calm and with grace and with understanding. Why? Because we've engaged as parents that thinking part of our brain and not just relying on the emotional part of our brain, because we often are a horrible parent when we parent just with emotion, but when you parent with calm and with logic, and that calm and logic comes from understanding, right? When you have that wisdom, then you're more apt to respond with calm and understanding. And I think that this post here is going to help increase that wisdom for you. Because I want your child to know beyond any doubt that they can land safely and softly with you, right? And then the last one here is to get help if needed. To get past our own shame, our own apprehensions as a parent, when we think our student or our son or our daughter, our teen, whatever, is struggling with an issue, sometimes our own shame can get in the way of doing the right thing. And I want us to get past that, because sometimes the issues are a little too much for what we're capable of handling. So what you see on the screen here are behaviors that I would look for to know that your child is in need of professional help. Something beyond what you're capable of doing as their parent or grandparent. And please, if any of these things are present, run towards someone. If you don't know who to go to, there are sometimes at local churches, it doesn't have to be a faith-based solution, but sometimes at local churches in your community, they'll have a directory of different types of counselors. Again, not all faith-based, some are just secular good counseling therapy, and you can call and ask them if you need to find, because it's difficult to find sometimes these counselors in your community, but that's sometimes a good place to begin if you don't have any idea where to start. And also know that the first one may not be the best fit. You may have to go to somebody, one or two of them in order to find a good fit for your son or daughter. So friends, there you go. Welcome to their world. I hope that these 6 things here help us answer the 2 questions, number 2 and 3, that I started off with, right? How to be prepared how to prevent some of these issues from happening. That's what we discovered there in the router and the ways to block the stuff in the first place. and then how to be prepared when these issues show up, how to respond, how to have conversations, how to do it frequently, how to drip it in, right? How to be calm. If we do these things, I think we have a better understanding of the world that our kids are growing up in today, and it helps us with empathy know how different it is from the childhood that we had. Because in a world that is increasingly hostile, a digital world that is increasingly hostile toward our children, we need to be prepared with the right conversations, with the right education. We have to help them know how to deal with these situations so they can be balanced in the amount of technology, the types of technology, and they can be protected from harm. Prepared, balanced, and protected. These are the things that we want for them. Now, I've given you a lot of different things that you can check out on our website. One of the ways that you can stay up to date on what is happening, because these issues are changing all the time. I could have made this video a year ago, and deepfakes and nudifying and that kind of AI technology didn't even exist yet. But the way you stay up to date is by staying in touch with our research, and that's what we share in something that we call the download. The download is about every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on our travel schedule, where we send out what we're finding. And then I share a note about some of my perspectives, and you can subscribe to that here. It's free. You can just drop your email address in on the form that pops up after you scan this QR code, and you can join thousands of parents all over the world who receive this free information so that you can stay up to date. And we're also very active on social media. I don't love it in the lives of kids, but I do think that I'm going to use it for as much good as possible by educating awesome parents and caregivers like you. So you can visit us there everywhere, mostly just called Protect Young Eyes. You can search for us there. So friends, there we go. That is pornography and self-generated content. Again, I'm Chris, the founder of Protect Young Eyes, and it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you here. Take care.